They laughed at him. They mocked his clothes, hated his silence, and called him a fraud. To them, he was just another old man on a bench, forgotten, unwanted, invisible. But what they didn't know was that he had once stood behind enemy lines, saving lives in the shadows, carrying the burdens of brothers lost in war. This is not just a story about prejudice, it's a story about truth revealed, honor reclaimed, and a salute that changed everything. Today, we remember the man they tried to erase. This is the story of Ezekiel Thompson, the man in the tattered hat. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from. If you like this story, please like and subscribe. Houston, Texas, Wednesday, 3:12 p.m. The sun beat down on the cracked pavement outside the downtown bus terminal, its heat sticking to the concrete like sweat on skin. Amid the bustling afternoon crowd, students on scooters, workers on phones, tourists fumbling with maps, sat a man few people noticed and fewer dared approach. Ezekiel Zeke Thompson, 84, slouched quietly on the far edge of a bench near Gate 5. His coat was too heavy for spring, draped over his fragile frame like a second skin of burden and memory. A faded U.S. Marine Corps cap rested low on his brow, its lettering almost worn out by time and touch. At his feet sat a weathered duffel bag, patched, fraying, and marked with initials that once meant something to somebody. He wasn't panhandling. He wasn't speaking. He simply was. A pair of teens snickered as they passed. "Yo, look at Grandpa G.I. Joe," one laughed. "Probably thinks he's still in Nam." Zeke didn't flinch. He'd heard worse. Behind the security counter, Chase Lindell, broad-shouldered and eager for authority, watched with narrowed eyes. He took a long sip from his energy drink, muttered, "Always one of them sitting around," and strode toward Zeke with practiced irritation. "You can't sleep here, old man," Chase barked, loud enough for heads to turn. "Move it, or I'll call someone to move you." Zeke slowly raised his eyes, gaze steady but tired. "Just waiting for the 510 to North Line," he said, voice dry but firm. Chase sneered. "You smell like you've been waiting since 1965. You sure you're even going anywhere?" Across the terminal, a young woman paused mid-step. Talia Wynn, a sophomore at the University of Houston, clutched her notebook tighter. She had just finished a class on war journalism, and something in the old man's stillness made her stop. Zeke lowered his head again, adjusting his cap. The Marine insignia glinted for half a second in the sunlight before the shadow of Chase's arm blocked it. "Sir," Talia said carefully, walking over, "is there a problem?" Chase rolled his eyes. "Just cleaning up the sidewalk." Talia looked at Zeke, then back at the guard. "He's not trash." Zeke said nothing. But in that moment, the wind shifted and someone had finally seen him. The 510 was still 2 hours away, but the story had already begun. Thursday morning, 9:42 a.m., Houston Veterans Affairs Office, Midtown. The double-glass doors slid open with a hollow whoosh as Zeke stepped inside the VA office. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the waiting area, where plastic chairs lined up like soldiers in a forgotten formation. Everything smelled faintly of paper dust and cold coffee. He moved slowly, each step marked by the quiet creak of his old joints. His cane tapped rhythmically against the floor. Tap, drag, tap. At the front counter sat a woman with red nails and tight blonde curls, typing without looking up. A badge pinned to her chest read, "Lauren Pierce, Client Services." Zeke waited politely for her attention. She didn't offer it. Finally, he spoke. "Ma'am, I was told to come down here. I need a replacement copy of my DD-214. They said it's the only way I can apply for housing. Still typing, still no eye contact. Then came the sigh, the long, theatrical kind. Lauren finally looked up, her expression one of clear disapproval. "Sir," she began, drawing out the word like an insult. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but the young man on the phone said I could walk in as long as I had my ID." "You mean this?" she asked, picking up his worn veteran ID card like it was a used tissue. "This thing's barely readable. It's old," Zeke said quietly, "like me." Lauren chuckled dryly, standing up and motioning to a passing security guard. "Mr. Thompson, was it? I'm sorry, but we've had issues before with folks coming in off the street pretending to be veterans. We can't have people loitering." Zeke blinked. "Loitering? I fought for this." Lauren cut him off. "I'm sure you did, but until you've showered and brought proper documentation, you'll need to leave." Behind them, Talia Wynn had just entered the lobby with her laptop bag. She froze as she saw Zeke standing at the counter, shoulders slightly hunched. Not from age, but from humiliation. The same man from the bus terminal. She stepped closer, careful not to make a scene. "Excuse me, is there an issue?" Lauren turned, all false charm. "This gentleman is just lost. Happens a lot." Talia looked at Zeke. "He's not lost. He's trying to get his service record." Lauren's smile thinned. "And you are?" "Someone who recognizes dignity when I see it," Talia replied. Lauren scoffed and turned away. "Security, please escort him out." Zeke didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up his duffel bag and turned, cane in hand. As the glass doors opened for him once again, Talia followed. "Sir, may I walk with you?" He nodded slowly. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, "but maybe I should." From across the street, a pair of office workers watched him go. One laughed. "There goes another confused old vet." But to Talia, each step he took was a quiet declaration. "I'm still here, and I remember everything." Thursday afternoon, 2:27 p.m., abandoned church shelter, 5th Ward. The air was still inside the old chapel, thick with the scent of mildew and memory. Sunlight pierced through stained glass, casting faded colors across the pews where no one had prayed in years. It wasn't a church anymore, just a husk of hollowed wood and peeling paint. But for Zeke Thompson, it was home, or at least the closest thing to one. He moved carefully through the shadows, lowering himself onto a bench near the altar. His duffel bag thudded softly beside him. With slow fingers, he unzipped it and pulled out a tin box, dented, rust-stained, held together with a strip of green military tape. He opened it like a man peeling back a wound. Inside were fragments of a life long buried, a bronze star, dulled with age, a folded, blood-stained letter addressed to Mrs. Reggie Jones, a scorched dog tag fused to a jagged piece of steel, and beneath them all, a black and white photo of two young Marines grinning in the jungle, their arms slung over each other's shoulders. Zeke stared at the photo for a long time. "Reggie," he whispered. His eyes drifted shut, and the present gave way to memory. Vietnam, 1965. The jungle was alive. You could feel it. The heat, the weight of silence before the ambush. Zeke and Reggie moved through the foliage like ghosts. Camouflage streaked across their faces. They were scouts, snipers, shadows trained to see without being seen. That day, Reggie stepped on a landmine. Zeke had heard the click, the sickening pause. He'd looked into his friend's eyes and seen the knowledge there, the acceptance. "Back up," Reggie had said calmly. "Tell Mama I wasn't scared." Zeke never got the chance. The blast tore the world apart. Shrapnel sliced through Zeke's arm, hurled him back. He remembered the smell: burnt cloth, gunpowder, flesh, then the ringing, then the silence. He woke up buried beneath soil and bone. He clawed his way out with a broken knife and trembling hands. Reggie was gone. Just part of a boot, half a tag, and the taste of ash. Back in the church, Zeke opened his eyes. Tears tracked silently down his cheeks. "I carried you home," he whispered, touching the dog tag, "even if no one else knew." The church bell above had long stopped working. The pews were cracked, and the cross had fallen from the wall. But here, in this forgotten place, Zeke lit a candle, his only ritual, and set the photo beside it. He didn't speak of God anymore. He'd seen too much. But as the flame flickered to life, casting shadows across his medals and memories, it danced on something deeper than belief. It danced on loyalty. It danced on grief. And in the dust and ashes of a ruined chapel, it danced on what was left of a soldier's heart. Friday, 6:35 p.m., Vernon's Market, East Houston. The corner store hummed with neon lights and the low static of an old radio playing gospel. A mother with 2 kids counted pennies for milk. A teenager argued over the price of chips. And in aisle 3, Ezekiel Thompson stood quietly, holding a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. He placed them on the counter, fingers trembling as he unfolded a $10 bill, creased and soft with wear. The young cashier, Derek, barely glanced at it before holding it to the light. "This yours?" he asked with a smirk. Zeke nodded once. "Yes, sir." Derek curled his lip. "Looks fake. Paper's too soft." "It's old," Zeke replied, "but it's real." "Uh-huh." Derek held the bill between 2 fingers like it carried disease. "We've had scams all week. Folks passing off garbage." "I'm no scammer," Zeke said. Derek didn't care. "Hey, Chase," he shouted toward the door. "We got another one." The security guard stepped in from outside. Chase Lindell again, still smug, still sure of his place in the world. When he saw Zeke, he grinned wide. "Oh, look, the bus bench philosopher." Zeke stood his ground. "I just want my groceries." "You want jail, old man? 'Cause passing fake cash is a crime." Chase grabbed Zeke's arm, not harsh, but enough to send a message. Zeke winced. "Son, I fought for this country." "Yeah," Chase scoffed. "You also fight for bath time? You smell like mildew and pity." By now, heads had turned. A small crowd had gathered. Some laughed, others just stared. Zeke tried to pull away. "Let me go." "Not until the cops check this out," Chase said, shoving Zeke against the counter. The bread hit the floor. The eggs cracked open. The old man crumpled slightly, more from shame than force. Then a voice cut through the room. "Get your hands off him." It was Talia Wynn, standing near the chip rack, phone in hand, camera recording. Chase turned. "Mind your business." "It became mine when you threw an 84-year-old veteran against a counter over a $10 bill," Talia snapped. "This man is a fraud," Chase said. "Then let's find out in court," Talia replied. "But you just laid hands on a senior citizen on camera." Zeke looked at her. His lips parted, but no words came. No one had stood for him in years. Police arrived minutes later. The crowd scattered. Derek shrugged as if none of it mattered. Chase fed the officers his version. Aggressive, possible impersonator, fake cash. Zeke didn't argue. As they cuffed him, he said softly, "That bill was from my last disability check. Used to buy bread for Reggie's mama." The officers hesitated. One looked uncertain, but protocol took over. As they led him outside, Talia followed, still filming, her voice steady. "This isn't justice. This is a performance." And so, under flashing lights and whispered slurs, Ezekiel Thompson, Marine sniper, survivor, was put on trial without a judge, without a jury, and without a shred of dignity. But the real trial had just begun. Monday, 10:12 a.m., Harris County Municipal Court, Room 3B. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tension. Rows of cheap benches creaked under the weight of indifference as a thin trickle of observers filled the gallery, most there for parking violations and petty thefts. No one expected a spectacle, certainly not one involving an elderly man in a frayed coat and scuffed boots. Ezekiel Thompson sat quietly at the defense table, his hands folded in his lap, the silver of his hair stark against the dull beige of the court-issued chair. His duffel bag, taped and sagging, rested at his feet like a soldier waiting for orders. He hadn't spoken since arriving, not when the bailiff asked his name, not when the guard chuckled, another fake hero looking for free meals. The prosecutor, Miss Audrey Monroe, mid-40s, efficient and unsympathetic, shuffled her files with the air of someone ready to wrap up a routine case. "Your Honor," she began, "this case involves a Mr. Ezekiel Thompson, detained while attempting to use a counterfeit bill at Vernon's Market. He refused to produce valid identification and allegedly became hostile when approached by security." Judge Helena Cross, a severe woman with icy eyes and a silver bob, adjusted her glasses. "Has the bill been tested?" "Yes," Audrey replied. "It was old but authentic. The issue is his behavior, the disturbance, and the suspicion raised by his appearance and refusal to cooperate." "Refusal?" Talia Wynne muttered from the gallery, scribbling notes furiously. Zeke still hadn't looked up. Then came the testimony. Derek, the cashier, smirked as he recalled. He was acting weird, muttering about Vietnam and dog tags. "Honestly, I thought he was high." Chase Lindell swaggered to the stand next. He said he was a Marine sniper. I mean, come on. He laughed. "Does he look like a sniper to you?" The room chuckled. Even the judge cracked a half smile. Zeke finally lifted his eyes. "I was a sniper," he said softly. "1st Marine Scout Sniper Division, 1965, Quang Nam Province." No one responded. He bent down slowly, opened his duffel bag. The courtroom hushed. He pulled out a worn velvet pouch. Inside, a bronze star, a purple heart, and a piece of steel with a dog tag fused to it. "This," he said, holding up the fused metal, "was Reggie, my spotter, the man who stepped on a mine to save me." Gasps rippled through the room. Even Judge Cross leaned forward. "I carried him home," Zeke continued, "even if only in pieces." He placed the items gently on the table, then sat back and said nothing. Silence fell. It was the kind of silence that made people stop and look. From the gallery, Talia raised her phone and whispered, "The world needs to know." But before the judge could speak, the courtroom doors opened, and in walked General Malcolm Raines, retired, revered, and walking with purpose. He made his way to Zeke, stopped, and saluted with crisp precision. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," he said, voice steady, "you saved my life." The courtroom erupted, and just like that the mock trial became a moment of national shame. Monday, 10:34 a.m., Harris County Municipal Court, Room 3B. The courtroom wasn't ready for the man who now stood at its center. General Malcolm Raines, decorated, towering, and unmistakably commanding, wore a dark blue suit adorned with a single pin, the Marine Corps emblem. His presence cracked the sterile stillness like a drumbeat at a funeral. He didn't glance at the judge, didn't acknowledge the prosecutor. His eyes were locked on Zeke. Then, without hesitation, he raised his hand in salute. A full salute. Not symbolic, not casual, the kind reserved for heroes. "Staff Sergeant Ezekiel Thompson," the general said loud and clear. was one of the first African American snipers deployed in Vietnam under Operation Silent Vow. He was my forward cover during the assault on Hill 68. If he hadn't neutralized that enemy nest, I and my entire unit would be in the ground. The room sat stunned. Even Judge Cross, composed and immovable moments ago, blinked like someone coming up for air. Audrey Monroe, the prosecutor, stammered, "With all due respect, General, this wasn't in any of the case files." Because the mission was classified, General Rains cut in sharply. For 40 years, his name was buried in red tape, his service erased from records the public never got to see. He turned to Chase Lindell, whose smug expression had dissolved into a blank, pale stare. "You laid your hands on a man whose courage built the very walls you hide behind." The words hung like a gavel. Talia Wynne stood slowly from the back row. "I knew something didn't add up," she said, voice trembling. "I saw him. Really saw him. The way he sat, the way he moved. He's not just a veteran, he's—" She stopped, blinking tears. "He's a chapter they never taught us." The judge, silent until now, finally leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "why didn't you say who you were?" Zeke looked up, tired but resolute. "Because it shouldn't matter." Those 4 words silenced everything. The courtroom, the noise in people's heads, the prejudice in their hearts. "It shouldn't matter what I wore or where I slept or whether my cap was clean," Zeke continued. "It shouldn't take a general walking in for folks to treat an old black man with dignity." No one argued. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to the bailiff. "Remove all charges from Mr. Thompson's record, effective immediately." Gasps turned into applause. Not from everybody, but from enough. Chase Lindell sat frozen, his authority stripped as easily as a uniform he never earned. Outside, the hallway was already filled with reporters, phones flashing, microphones raised. News would spread like fire. But inside room 3B, something deeper had changed. Truth long buried had found air. A silence long endured had finally cracked. And the man once mistaken for a nuisance had just reminded an entire system what respect looks like. Not through shouting, but by surviving. Monday, 10:47 a.m., Harris County Municipal Court, Room 3B. You could have heard a pin drop. Even after the charges were dismissed, no one moved. Not the judge, not the reporters pressing their faces against the glass, not the dozen court clerks pretending to sort papers while stealing glances at the man who had just rewritten the entire atmosphere of the room. Zeke Thompson, now standing, held his Marine cap against his chest. General Rains turned to the judge. "With your permission, Your Honor, I'd like to say one final thing." Judge Cross nodded wordlessly. Rains stepped forward and faced the courtroom gallery. "There are moments in life where silence is a weapon," he said. "When we ignore, when we dismiss, when we refuse to see someone for who they truly are, we wound them. And sometimes," he paused, looking at Zeke, "those wounds last longer than shrapnel ever could." He turned to Zeke and said more softly now, "I never got to say thank you. You saved my life, and I spent the next 40 years chasing medals while you carried ghosts." Zeke looked down, jaw clenched. His hand trembled slightly. Then came the moment. Rains turned sharply, faced the courtroom, and saluted again, this time not as a soldier, but as a citizen. One by one, people began to stand. Talia rose first, then a young black bailiff in the back, then the officer who had arrested Zeke just days earlier. Even Judge Cross stood slowly, removing her glasses, and then, a beat later, came the ripple. Court staff, observers, reporters, They stood in silence, facing the man who had once been mocked for smelling of mildew and carrying a battered duffel bag. The applause didn't come right away, because respect, real respect, doesn't start with noise. It starts with stillness. Zeke looked up, eyes moist, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His medals lay on the table beside him, not as trophies, but as testimony. The man they had ridiculed was no longer invisible. He had stood his ground, even when the world tried to erase him. And now the world was standing for him. The salute, once solitary, had become a reckoning, and no one in that room would ever forget the sound of nothing. The sound that meant everything had changed. Sunday, 11 a.m., St. Mary's Chapel, 5th Ward. The doors of the old church had been closed for nearly 20 years. The windows were boarded, the pews warped by time. But this morning, sunlight spilled through freshly cleaned glass, and the once silent bell in the steeple waited for a sound it hadn't made in decades. Outside, a crowd gathered, veterans in dress blues, families holding small flags, children in their Sunday best. News vans lined the street. At the steps, a bronze plaque gleamed in the morning light. In honor of Staff Sergeant Ezekiel Thompson, Scout Sniper, United States Marine Corps, for valor, for sacrifice, for dignity. Talia Wynne stood beside the plaque, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes wet but smiling. She turned as the crowd parted. Zeke approached slowly, cane in one hand, Reggie's dog tag around his neck. The same worn coat hugged his frame, but this time it looked like armor. General Rains met him at the steps and offered a salute. Zeke returned it, steady and proud. Then Talia placed the bell rope in Zeke's hand. "For all those who never got to come home," she whispered. Zeke nodded, then pulled. The bell rang. It echoed down the block, over rooftops, through open windows. It rang not just for honor, but for recognition, for every forgotten name, for every quiet man who carried the war home in silence. As the crowd bowed their heads, Zeke looked up toward the bell tower. "I told you I'd ring it for you, Reggie," he murmured. And for the first time in years, the sound of that promise filled the sky. It was not just a memorial. It was a resurrection. And in that moment, the city remembered and the world stood.